topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Who is January Jones? She is not a young, beautiful, talented actress on Mad Men. She is not an older, gorgeous, exotic dancer from the Johnny Carson Show. She is an author, and she wrote Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th Commandment, that reached #1 at Amazon.com. She is a reality TV golf personality with World High Stakes Golf televised on HDNet. She is a humorist and winologist expert. She is your featured host today on January Jones Sharing Success Stories. So sit back, relax, and get ready to laugh and listen to Ms. Jones with her eclectic roster of guests as you learn life's lessons. These stories plus sharing equals success. Welcome, and remember, beware, because you are entering the no whining world of January Jones.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a fabulous day. I'm January Jones, and I'd like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Senior Success Stories. Also, I want to share with everyone that I've created a new brand. Will be becoming, or I am, the Glitter Granny, and I'll be hosting the Glitter Granny's Gifts at Amazon in the very, very near future. It'll be affiliate marketing for me. I am associate affiliate now, and I'll be selling books that we've promoted here on the show, and products that I personally will be recommending to everyone. And these are products that I've bought myself and used, so you'll get the straight story for me. Now, for my listeners, let me ask you a question. Did you know that it is Black History Month? Yes, February. Have you ever heard the term Black is beautiful? Yeah, of course, we all have, haven't we? Have you wondered what it means, what it really means? Now, how about the term systemic racism? We've all heard about it, but I'm not sure many of us know what it means. Now, would you like to meet someone who can explain these terms for us? Tell me, have you ever heard about a fabulous book entitled Born on This Continent? If you can answer yes or maybe to any of these questions, then I'd like to welcome you to January Jones Sharing Senior Success Stories. Today it's time to rest, relax, go get yourself some cheese, crackers, get a glass of wine, and join us in the no wine zone. Now we're going to meet someone who can personally share her own experiences with racism. She is an African textile artist, fashion designer, and inspirational speaker who has been described as a vibrant bundle of African energy whose zest and passion for life inspires everyone she meets. She's an international speaker, celebrated author, philanthropy consultant, Rooney International Scholar, 3 times TEDx speaker. She is passionate about helping people achieve their full potential and find their individual purpose in life. Now I'd like to introduce you to a diversity connector, my dear friend, Getrude Matshe. Hi, Getrude.
Hello, January. Wonderful to see you again.
I know, as we talked about before we went on the air, it's been close to 10 years.
It's been a while.
And you know, I haven't forgot you at all. And I want to share with you that our show that we did together those many years ago has been put in replays constantly all through Blog Talk and iHeart and everywhere. And it still is just a very popular show with everyone. So what have you been doing in these last 10 years so I can catch up?
A little catch up. I am now living in Melbourne, Australia.
Uh-huh.
Left Wellington, New Zealand during COVID, had come to be with my daughter when she was having her first baby, and got stuck here for 8 months because of the lockdowns.
Oh, uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So I'm
Well,
now a proud grandmother.
oh, wow. Wow. Isn't that exciting? That worked out well for you then. You weren't,
It did.
yeah, you weren't stuck somewhere you didn't want to be.
I wanted to be here, and I've decided to stay.
Yeah. And, this is Black History Month, which was why you sent me a fabulous email this past week or so. And I looked at it and I thought, I've got to get that gal back here and have her share her experiences and her knowledge of systemic racism. We hear about that all the time, but not many of us know what it actually means. And from your email, I understand there's 5 different kinds of racism: internalized, impersonal, individual, structural, and institutional. Could you go through each one of those with us and give us some insight into what it means and your experiences with those kinds of racism?
Well, I think the place to start is to really break down what systemic racism is all about. It's
Mm-hmm.
also known as institutional racism, and it refers to a complex interactions of policies, practices, and cultural representations that reinforce and perpetuate racial inequality. This form of racism is embedded within systems, structures of society,
Mm-hmm.
including legal, economic, educational, and political institutions,
Uh-huh.
leading to the disadvantages of certain racial and ethnic groups whilst privileging others. So, those disparities in social justice, economic inequality, educational disparities, health disparities, housing discrimination,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
all encompassed under systemic racism. So
Mhm.
I think that's really the basis of understanding what we're talking about here, because sometimes people hear these words,
Mhm.
thrown around and you don't quite understand.
Right, right.
So racism itself is very complex and multifaceted, and it manifests in various forms, reflecting deep seated prejudices and systematic inequalities. So, now let me break down the different types of racism out there.
Mhm.
Post that you saw on LinkedIn that I shared last week was on individual racism.
Okay.
Individual racism is something that happens to an individual based on experiences you've had, personal prejudices, stereotypes that manifest through behaviors, language, actions that demean or harm individuals based on their racial and ethnic background. And I can only share what this has been for me as an individual.
Right.
So I grew up in apartheid Rhodesia before Zimbabwe had independence.
Mhm.
We had a similar system to the United States with race relations issues. Black and white people were not allowed to mix
Mhm.
under British colonial rule. So I was a little black girl who was thrown into an all white school. For children to get the best education, you had to go to the white schools. Black schools in Rhodesia at the time offered substandard education. So my parents wanted the best for their kids. And I was always the first Black child in every school, every institution I ever attended. And I
I'm
experienced,
curious to ask you, how did your parents manage to do this? Were they extremely wealthy?
my parents were not rich. They were rich in how they thought. They
Mhm.
knew that getting a good education would break the cycle of poverty. So
Mhm.
my dad was fortunate to get a scholarship in 1967, the year that I was born,
Uh-huh.
to go to the UK and get his first degree. He took his young wife with him and left me and my sister with my grandmother. So I was 9 months old, my
Uh-huh.
sister was 2. And
Wow.
they shared one scholarship, struggled for 3 years, and managed to raise money for me and my sister to join them in the UK. So I lived in the UK from the age of 3 until I was 6.
Oh my gosh. Now, when you went to the UK, did your grandmother go with you or just the two of you?
So unfortunately, my grandmother stayed behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine she did the best she could, no income, in a village where we were put on a reservation
Mm-hmm.
under
Mm-hmm.
colonial rule, hardly able to grow anything, semi-desert, semi-arid land.
Uh-huh.
And I was the poster child for World Vision, severely malnourished. My
Oh,
grandmother did the best she could, but it wasn't easy.
oh, sure.
So
Yeah.
when my parents raised the money for our tickets, we went and joined them in the UK. We came back when I was 6 years old, and my parents were forced to come back because these were Commonwealth scholarships. When you graduated, you had to go back to your country of origin.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So my dad became a chartered accountant, my mother became a nurse. But
Uh-huh.
when they got back to Rhodesia, my dad could not get a white collar job because he was Black. So
Mhm.
despite his UK qualifications, nobody would employ him.
Wow.
My
Yeah.
father ended up working in a chicken slaughtering factory
Oh my gosh.
until Zimbabwe got independence in 1980. And they relied on my mother's salary. So she was working in a hospital,
Uh-huh.
and it was a struggle.
Oh.
So mom was a very creative woman,
Mm-hmm.
was an entrepreneur. After work, she would teach us how to make things to help raise the money for our own school fees. So from the age of 6, we were taught to knit, to crochet, to sew. We were constantly making things to sell. And on the weekends, when she had her days off, she would cross that racial line, go into all the white neighborhoods to sell her wares.
Oh.
And sometimes she would take me with her because I was the younger of the 2 children at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I watched my mother hustling to raise the money for us to go to private school, and it changed the trajectory of my life.
Wow. That is just an amazing. This is going to be an amazing visit with you today. I know my listeners are going to learn so much. Before we go on, I do want to share something with my listeners. If you are a whiner or know a whiner, this book is for you.
Lately, there's a whining epidemic in our world. People are even whining about whining. Are you sick and tired of listening to everyone whining all the time? So was January Jones, the author of Thou Shall Not Whine, the 11th commandment that reached #1 at Amazon.com. Ms. Jones based her book on a survey of the top 10 things that people whine about at all ages and all stages of life. January is a success coach that can tell you how to help others. When you buy Thou Shalt Not Whine, the 11th commandment, you'll find out what people whine about and how to stop them from whining. This is the perfect gift book to give or get for any occasion. Thou Shalt Not Whine was voted the best gift to be given anonymously for those special people in your life. Ms. Jones is an internationally known author in the style of Irma Bombeck, specializing in housewife humor with her book being published in Korea and China. You can find Thou Shalt Not Whine at Amazon.com.
Welcome back to the No Wine Zone with Getrude Matshe. And she is definitely not a whiner because she is a winner, as you'll find out as we listen to more of her story. Now, here you were with your mother going to the villages to sell things. What an experience for a child. Did you enjoy it, or was it a task, or how did it evolve?
It was the basis that made me an amazing saleswoman.
Oh,
My mother could sell snow to the Eskimos. She was an incredible salesperson. And I distinctly remember one day I went with her. So we would travel on a bicycle.
mm-hmm.
Have a big basket of wares in the front. I'm strapped to the bike at the back. And we had walked for hours and sold nothing. I was hungry. I was thirsty. I just wanted to go home.
Right, right.
And I was whining and complaining. You talk about whining. She stopped the bike in the middle of the street and she looked me in the eyes and she said, listen, you need to remember two things when you sell. People have got two choices. They can say yes or they can say no. If they say yes, you've made your sale, you go and knock on the next door and make another sale. If they say no, it's got nothing to do with you. They
Okay.
just don't need what you're selling.
Mhm.
So as we said this, we knocked on the next door. You own your house. I remember it had these big white pillars in the front. I'd never seen such a beautiful home before.
Mhm, mhm.
And the lady of the house opened the door, which was very unusual at the time because most European people would have servants who did that for them. But
Mhm.
this woman must have seen my sorry little face.
Oh,
She invited us into the house, which again was not done. I had never been in a white person's house before.
my gosh.
The first thing she did is she went to the kitchen,
Mhm.
came
Got
back with a glass of juice and a slice of cake. And I remember that piece of cake to this day.
Oh, yeah.
Started
Wow.
talking to my mom, asking her why she was selling. And my
Uh-huh.
mother said, my girls go to the convent. Now, the Dominican convent was the most expensive school in the country. And it
Uh-huh.
baffled her. And she said, why? Why don't you send your children to the township schools where all the other African children go?
Uh-huh.
Mom said, because my girls need a good education. If they're
Mhm.
educated, they will get out of poverty. Now, January, I was 6.
Yes.
I realized what my mother meant, the value of the education I was getting.
Mhm, mhm.
And apparently, this lady bought everything in our basket. She didn't have to buy everything, but she did.
Wow.
Walking home,
Uh-huh.
mom explained that she had bought enough for 2 years of our education.
Oh my gosh.
We
How
paid for school
wonderful.
fees for 2 years. And my mother said there's two kinds of people in the world,
Mhm.
people and there's bad people. That woman is a good person. So never let the color of somebody's skin
Oh,
stop you from getting to know them.
yes, yes.
So when you grow up in a racist society, you can carry a chip on your shoulder. You can
Mhm.
expect all white people to be racist, and not everybody is.
Yeah.
So I've gone into the world with that lens. I give people an opportunity to show up for who they are. And
Mhm.
I've built amazing relationships with people all over the world because of it.
Wow.
So many lessons were learned by hanging out with my mom when she was selling.
Well, that's such a marvelous lesson to learn when you're only 6 years old and to keep it with you through your entire life.
Yeah.
Did your sister, how was she the younger one or how did
I was the youngest, so mom would always take me with her. I would complain. I wanted to go with her.
uh-huh.
So she would take me with her.
Mhm.
My sister.
And so was it difficult for your parents to get you girls into the school with the Dominican nuns? How
It
did that
was.
come
The
about?
fortunate thing is that the Dominican convent was a Catholic school.
Mhm.
My parents were Catholic, so the parish priest wrote a letter to
Uh-huh.
vouch for us to get into the school. And independence was on the way, and they knew that they had to start changing their
Mhm.
practices and start bringing in Black children into these schools. And they were being very, very selective.
Mhm.
And it just so happened that my dad managed to talk to the parish priest who vouched for us, and we got in because of that.
Okay, okay. Now, when you got into the school, were you, how were you, were you accepted or how did the transition go? Did the other children bully you?
We were bullied.
Oh, yeah.
We were bullied like you cannot believe. The other
Mhm.
kids would spit at us.
Oh my
They
goodness.
would shout racial slurs. So in Africa, the word for nigger is kafa. So
Cactus.
they would tell us, Kaffas go home, your baboons, your dogs. And
Yeah.
effectively, we never went out into the playground during break time to
Mhm.
avoid that.
Yes,
And
yes.
I became a bookworm because of it. I would just immerse myself in books,
Mhm.
and it became my biggest gift. And now I'm a writer because of it.
Wonderful.
But it was not easy. It
Mhm.
wasn't an crazy time. And even the nuns were not very kind.
Really?
People ask me if I'm religious. I am not religious. I'm very, very spiritual. I had religion beaten out of me
By them.
2 weeks after I started school. I was playing in a garden, didn't realize that the garden was forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the nuns came charging into the garden, grabbed me, and she beat me until I fainted.
Oh my
I
God.
woke up in sick bay 2 hours later, and I realized that religion doesn't actually mean anything. It's who you are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
My religion is my work. I express kindness and compassion to people that I meet. You can go to church every single day and be religious, but that doesn't mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
So it formed my persona as a spiritual person, that experience.
Mm. You know, I shared a similar story, not as dramatic as yours, obviously, but I also went to a Catholic school my entire life. I never had been to the public schools ever. And we had this situation where one of my classmates, a gal I love, there were only 5 girls who were Black in our class. There was like about 180. And she was fabulous. You know, she was a student council. She was, you name it, she did it. And she was really well liked. Everyone loved her. And when we got to graduation time, they were always trying to get us to become nuns, you know, and we were all being brainwashed. So we always think about it whenever we broke up with a boyfriend or something. And so it came to graduation time, and she applied to go in the convent. She wanted to become a nun. She was very religious. Her parents were Catholic, they were religious. And this is the thing that turned me off from the whole story. She was turned down by the white convent, by the nuns, because they had never had a Black woman join them. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so hypocritical. Because here
Yes.
they were teaching us love everyone, you know, we're all equal. And then when it came to that situation, and just like you, I sat down and I said, you know, this isn't right. Something's wrong here.
So that leads into structural racism really neatly as an example.
Mm-hmm.
This is systems which are embedded in the society. So it could be the legal system that discriminates, an education system, law enforcement, healthcare. That's what institutional racism is all about. So I'm really glad you touched on that as
Good.
well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. Um, Impersonal racism. Tell me a little bit what's that like?
So with personal racism,
Mm-hmm.
it's when the racism happens within the marginalized race itself. So, for example, African people's skin color is very, very different. We have different shades of brown,
Mm-hmm.
and some of us are darker skinned, some of us are fairer skinned, some of us have got different textures of hair.
Mm-hmm.
And so, within the African community itself, we've taken on the things that we've learned from our colonial masters.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a thing called good hair. When your hair is silky and straighter, that's called good hair.
Oh, okay.
And if you are fairer skinned, you're treated differently. You're considered to be more beautiful.
Oh, really? Yeah, sure.
So that happens a lot within our race. And it's a very, very sad thing to see families treating certain children differently just
Oh,
based on how they look.
mm-hmm.
And in South Africa, when I lived in South Africa, they had what was called the pencil test. So
Oh,
I have very tight curls. I have what's called a 4C curl, which is the tightest curl you can get in
mm-hmm.
any hair type across the globe with any human race.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have my afro and I put a pencil in my head and shake my head, the pencil doesn't fall off. It stays in my hair because my curl is so tight.
Oh, I see. The pencil test.
In South Africa, the pencil test was used to classify people.
Really?
Yes.
I've never heard of anything like that.
And also the brown paper bag test. I think it was also used in the United States, where they would hold a brown bag against your face. Depending on what color your skin was, you were either better or worse than darker skinned people.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the things that happen with personal racism. And you actually find people who are darker skinned beating themselves up, low self-esteem. It leads to depression. It leads to a lot of internalized anguish for that individual, not seeing their own beauty and not realizing their self-worth. It's a very, very sad thing to see.
You know, when you were speaking earlier, you said our masters, and I thought I heard you say monsters.
It is both.
Yeah, I think subliminally, that's what I was thinking. I definitely heard monsters on that one. When you went to the school, was it a boarding school? Did you live there, or did you go back and forth?
Fortunately, no. We were day scholars. We couldn't afford the boarding school. It was too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have to go home at the end of each day.
Well, that's wonderful that you didn't have to stay there with all these kids bullying you and the picking on you. I can really, that's just horrible to think about. You know, before we go to break, would you share with our listeners your website and where they can find you?
So my website is herstorycircle.net. And you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. Those are the two platforms I play on the most, and Instagram.
Oh, wonderful. Good. And that is down at the bottom of the screen. So make a note and make sure you go to check her out. And right now, we're going to hear a little bit about who killed Kennedy.
Let me ask you a question. Are you still wondering who killed Kennedy? Over 50 years later, the assassination is still a mystery. It is unfinished business for our country. Now, get ready for a theory that you've never heard before, but will make more sense than any other conspiracy theory that you've ever heard in the past. January Jones speaks the unspeakable in her book, Jackie, Ari, and Jack, The Tragic Love Triangle, connecting Jackie and Aristotle Onassis romantically prior to JFK's assassination. Did you know that Ari was Jackie's guest in the White House during the JFK funeral? He was the only non-family member who was invited by Jackie to stay there during the funeral. Aristotle Onassis was one of the wealthiest men in the world, with the means, the motive, and the money to order an assassination that was the perfect crime of the last century. Ari needed class, and Jackie needed cash. They were perfect for each other. Now, what is Camelot? It is but another tragic love triangle. Jackie, Ari, and Jack is available at JanuaryJones.com, Amazon.com, and audiobooks.com, read by Ms. Jones.
Welcome back with our author, who is visiting with us from Melbourne, Australia, Getrude Matshe. And she is also, I want to share, she's also a granny. And so I think I'm going to have to make her an honorary glitter granny so she can glow with me while she's enjoying her grandson. You know, I've read things about the issue with hair for Black families and for children, especially for girls, and dealing with it is quite a complicated thing, isn't it?
It really is. You know, right now, my little grandson is biracial. So my daughter married an Australian boy. And within our family, we come from many, many different lineages. We did a DNA test very recently. We always knew that my ex-husband's great-grandfather was white, so his grandmother is biracial. And it's interesting that the color jumps a generation. So my ex-husband is very dark-skinned, but our children are very fair-skinned. So you can actually see the white blood in them than in my ex-husband.
Yeah.
And when he talked about his experiences, his grandmother was almost taken away from her mother during the colonial days.
Mm-hmm.
She was biracial. They would take what were called colored children away from their parents.
Really?
Been brought up in an orphanage without her parents, but fortunately her mother hid her when the authorities came to take her away. And it's just interesting that people of African descent are made up of a variety of races, although it doesn't always manifest, in physically how you look.
Mm-hmm.
I found out that 55% of my DNA is from Cameroon. And we always thought we were from Southern Africa. So that was a new revelation on my side as well.
Okay.
And Africa is such an amazing continent. I must have had a nomad ancestor who came from the north part of Africa and came down to the south.
Mm-hmm.
But start tracing back the DNA, you find that this is what we get within our own societies, and that's what's called colorism.
Yes. Okay. That's a big factor. Talking about DNA, our family did that. And I discovered after 75 years that I had a brother I didn't know had existed. He's a half brother. We had different mothers, but we had the same father. And it took 75 years for us to find each other. And we've had a wonderful, we call it the highlight of our twilight relationship. And it's interesting. I think I was surprised too with the DNA thing because my husband's family's Norwegian. And so I've been masquerading for 53 years as a Norwegian. And then my DNA came back and I found out that I was 2% Norwegian. So I said, I'm one of you guys. The other thing too, we had an interesting guest on a few months ago, and he talked about the Osage Indians here in the United States. And those children too were taken from their families and taken and put into Catholic schools.
Yes.
They completely erased their heritage from them.
Actually, that explains my name. You know how you said you had misspelled my name in the email?
Yeah.
My name should be spelled Gertrude, but it's spelled Getrude.
Getrude.
My own grandmother was taken away from her parents when she was young and thrown into a German orphanage run by Catholic nuns. Mm-hmm. She did not know her parents. She did not know her African name. And she said when she turned 6, she dropped the R in Gertrude as an act of defiance to piss off the nuns. Good. They beat her until she was black and blue, and she refused to change it back. Mm-hmm. So to honor my grandmother's story, most African names have a story around them.
Yes.
Our names actually mean something. You're normally named around the circumstances of your birth. So I have deliberately kept my grandmother's misspelled name so that her story doesn't die.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful.
I have to share why I've got a misspelled German name. I'm an African woman from Southern Africa.
Yeah.
With a name like Gertrude, but that happened a lot during the colonial era.
Share with us, how did your grandmother get back and find her real family? How long did it take and how did she do it?
It took years. It all happened after independence, of course. People started reconnecting, finding lost children. And it was her mother's brothers who were still alive. Unfortunately, both her parents were deceased by then.
Yeah. Well, that I can share that feeling of finding a brother after all those years. It's a wonderful experience. What else would you share about your experiences with racism?
I can talk again about cultural racism.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, Africa is a melting pot of different tribes. And I come from a tribe called the Shona people.
Mm-hmm.
My ex-husband came from a tribe called the Ndebele. The Ndebele came from Southern Africa, from South Africa. The Ndebele tribe are the Zulus, the Xhosas. Their language has got the click sounds to it.
Uh-huh.
And they came up north to Zimbabwe. They used to apparently come and raid our villages and steal the Shona women because we have got very wide hips and nice looking legs. This was the story my grandmother used to tell me. But when we got married, we had a lot of issues because we came from two different tribes.
Oh, yeah.
I actually remember my wedding day was a total disaster because in the Shona culture, when a girl gets married, you spend 6 months beating a gourd. I don't know if you know what a gourd is, but it is a pumpkin that is dried and then scooped out, and you turn it into a container that can hold water or oil. But you're gifted a gourd by your grandmother, and you have to bead it with very intricate beadwork. It's about this big.
Uh-huh.
It took me 6 months to bead this gourd, and you fill it with oil. And my first ritual to my extended new family is the day after the wedding, I would go and fetch some water and kneel in front of all of my husband's relatives, his mother, his grandparents, his uncles, his aunts, and they wash their hands. I would give them a towel, they will dry their hands, and then use the oil inside the gourd to moisturize their hands. It's just a first service to my new extended family, right?
Okay.
So I show up at the village for my wedding.
Yeah.
To park the car 10 kilometers away. My husband comes from a very big family. His father and his mother came from families of 8, 10 people. So he's got a very large extended family. And so I had to walk to his village 10 kilometers, and everybody came out into the streets. There was drumming, there was singing, and celebrating that a new bride has come to the community. When I got to the main house, I had to be shrouded in a white sheet. And each step I took, by the way, my relatives were given money. So they throw money at my feet, and it was an incentive for me to come into the village. To see my beautiful face for the first time, they had to pay money, and then they would unveil me.
Okay.
And I was inside the sheet holding my beaded gourd and live chicken, which I would kill the day after the wedding and cook for my first service as the first meal I cook for the family. Now, in my ex-husband's family, they became very, very Christian, did not believe in anything traditional, anything African traditional. And I was almost labeled a witch for showing up with a live chicken, because that would represent voodoo. It was a total disaster. And I remember one of my ex-husband's aunts running out of the house and telling me to throw away the chicken, throw away the gourd. And the poor chicken got a second life. It ran into the bush, and it was just one of the most hilarious experiences. But we're two African people from the same country, two different tribes, but very different ways of cultural practices that can cause clashes within communities as well.
Oh my gosh, that's an amazing story. It's nice that you can tell it and laugh about it all these years later.
You have to laugh. It's just crazy. We have to laugh about these things, otherwise you'll cry.
We're going to take a break now and ask, have you ever met someone who was unforgettable? I would like to share with you some of the most memorable guests who have been on this show. Have you ever met someone who was unforgettable? Someone who has touched your heart and soul? People who have faced difficult problems? People who have struggled to find solutions? People who fearlessly shared their stories? People who have not only informed you, but inspired you? People who have priceless personalities? I have been fortunate to host an internet radio talk show called January Jones Sharing Success Stories. and it has been my privilege to interview hundreds of guests. My guests have shared their stories, their struggles, their secrets, and their successes in their own words. In this book, we're talking about people dealing with problems such as incest, molestation, runaway kids, child abuse, drug abuse, polygamy, unemployment, scandal, and starting over. Then there are my guests dealing with difficult physical struggles such as blindness, cancer, and birth defects that are beyond traumatic. My guests have all been exciting, eclectic, and energizing. They have amazed, amused, and even astonished me. I have adored getting to meet them, and I adore sharing them with you.
Attention all listeners. Priceless Personalities, Success Stories Shared by January Jones, Volume 2 is now available at Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle editions. You'll be able to meet 10 amazing people who will be sharing their own personal stories with all their struggles, successes, and solutions, sprinkled with lots of humor and hope. Priceless Personalities features a teenager who becomes one of the famous Supremes from Motown. A nurse who, as a humorist, helps people to heal, an inspiring laughter yoga instructor, a mother dealing with the loss of a child, an incredible motivational speaker, a woman who married 5 times, a gifted paranormal nurse, a wise economist, a funny female humorist, along with an older man sharing his sweet childhood in the Deep South. January's guests are all amazing and amusing. You will never forget meeting them. Go to Amazon.com for your own priceless experience.
Welcome back with another priceless personality, a guest on our show, and she's been on our show. This is her second visit with us, and she's explaining systemic racism to some of us and giving us incredible examples of how it happened and how it affected her entire life. Let me ask you a question. We have to end the show, sadly, but before we end, I always ask this question to everyone who comes on the show. If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, besides me, who would you choose to dine with?
Oh, wow. I almost had dinner with Nelson Mandela once.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I got on a flight to go to London. It was the unveiling of his 90th birthday statue in Parliament Square in London. And he got sick on the flight coming to the UK from South Africa, and he didn't show up at the dinner. So Mandela was my hero. I would have loved to have had dinner with him.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. That's an interesting question because so many people surprise me, and you're the first one who's ever said Nelson Mandela, but I could see where he would fit right in there. A lot of my guests say they'd like to have dinner with Oprah, and I certainly would. She's someone, we talk about this presidential thing going on, and I say, well, I would like to see, of course, Michelle Obama run for president, and if not her, Oprah. But I think that's wishful thinking. I'm sure a lot of women feel that way. So what are your plans now in the future? What are you up to lately?
So at the moment, I have just registered my first technology startup. I developed an application called the Diversity Connector.
Uh-huh.
And it is a platform that connects diverse people from all over the world with organizations that are looking for us. So since I got to Melbourne, Australia, I realized that there is a big gap. We are a minority here, and there's a lot of organizations, institutions that look for diverse people to come in and run workshops around racism, and diversity, inclusion, belonging workshops. So that's my latest business adventure.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's wonderful to hear. I'm glad to see that you're keeping so active. We have to do that when we get to this stage. Now, when you look back, do you have any regrets or things that you wish you could do differently when you look back on your life?
I would do it exactly the same way. I've had a very, very challenging life. with lots of ups and downs, things that went wrong, things that went right, 2 divorces. But when I do look back on my life, I was actually talking to a friend the other day.
Mhm.
I was saying to her, I'm just so ready to let life just level out and be smooth for a while.
Mhm.
And she said to me, Gertrude, you're like a little pebble that was in a river. And as you've been rolling in this river, you are getting smoother and smoother and smoother. You know how you get those smooth river pebbles?
Mhm. Mhm.
So she gave me a beautiful analogy of my life that, yeah, life is rocky, but at the end of it, you will come out smooth. So
Oh,
I would
yeah.
live my life exactly the same way. I had a lot of lessons along the way.
Oh, for sure. And have you written a memoir yet, or you're in?
I have.
Well,
So
or
Born
not?
on the Continent is my first memoir,
Mhm.
and that was written almost 20 years ago. And I am working on a sequel to Born on the Continent,
Oh,
which
wonderful.
is called Beyond the Continent Ubuntu.
Good.
So everything I share is around the Ubuntu philosophy.
Wow, that's incredible. Before we go on, I want to remind our listeners that all of the books that I was promoting at Amazon, they're all now available in Audible form too. Also, I wanted to share with you, Gertrude, that I'm reading an amazing book. A Black friend of mine gave it to me. It's 1619. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it tells a different view of our American Revolution, our country, and it's a Black point of view that most people have never heard about. And
Okay,
I'll
that
be
up.
I'll be talking more about that book on the show in the future. Um, so nice to have you back with us, and we've really it's been good to touch base again.
Thank you so much, January. Wonderful to reconnect with you, and thank you for the opportunity to share this important topic during Black History Month.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Remember, listeners, we hope you've enjoyed our time together. We tried to be informative and inspiring. My upcoming guests will all be eclectic, exciting, and energizing, just like Getrude. Next Tuesday at 3 p.m., I'm looking forward to welcoming a new friend. Her name is Cindy Jordan, and she's an author of an amazing book called The Pearl that when I read it, I couldn't put it down, and I highly recommend it. Now, my 80-year-old thought for the day, and this is a fun one. This is the law of the bathtub. And this states that when the body is fully immersed in water, for sure the telephone will ring. And if you and if you're close to it and you get it, then you will drop it in the water. So don't get involved with the law of the bathtub. This is January Jones signing off as the Glitter Granny. Thank you for entering the No Wine Zone with us today. It's been so much fun having you here. And please share our stories and our show with everyone you know. And remember, stop whining and then start smiling. And if that doesn't work, then you can just start eating chocolate. Lots of chocolate. Goodbye to Australia.
So much, January. Take care.
Okay, come back again.
Bye.
We want to thank you for listening to January Jones Sharing Success Stories. Always remember Ms. Jones' personal mantra, if you can think it, you can do it. That's what all of our guests have done with their lives, and so can you. You are the ultimate success coach in your own life. All you need to do will be to start sharing your own story with your family and friends. We hope that our guest stories will encourage you to explore an equation in your future that will combine your creativity plus connecting with others will enable you to be successful too. Always remember, your passion plus your purpose will equal prosperity as you explore the wonderful world of January Jones.